I'm so honored to be here with Robert F. Kennedy Jr., independent candidate for president. How have you been doing? I first just want to start out by asking your reaction to all these candidacy changes in the last couple of weeks.
Yeah, it's been eventful. It's been, Mark Twain said that history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes. And what's happening now is just very, very familiar to me from 1968. There are so many parallels, and that's the year that my dad ran and then was assassinated. So you had my father, like me, was running against a president of his own political party. In both cases, the president has now withdrawn. There was, assassination features. My father was assassinated. Martin Luther King was assassinated 2 months before during the height of the presidential campaign. There was a convention, Democratic convention in Chicago, like there is this year, that is likely to involve a lot of rioting or public protests in both cases. And in both cases, the DNC decided not to have a democratic process, but to pick or to anoint its own candidate. And so there are a tremendous number of parallels, and it's, as I said, it's very, very familiar to me. That time period really was a fork in the road for our country. We Nixon got elected. We had, after that, we turned away from the optimism and the idealism of the Kennedy administration, which had ended with my uncle's assassination 4 years before. And we started down this kind of grim progression, including Vietnam, Watergate, the Iran-Contra affair, 9/11, Guantanamo, all of these kind of dark dystopian milestones of modern American political history. And in many ways, I look at my campaign as an effort or crusade to reclaim the idealism of the early 1960s.
So I really want to talk to you about what is the path to victory at this point, because one thing that I hear a lot when I meet people is that they really like you. They embrace the platform and the campaign that you've run, but they say, well, he has less of a chance than the other candidates, so I might vote for them instead.
Yeah, when Ross Perot ran, it was interesting because Ross Perot ended up with about 19% of the vote, but when they did exit polls that year, and they asked people who they wanted to vote for, 36% of the people said, I wanted to vote for Perot, but I didn't because I was scared he couldn't win. But if he had gotten 36% of the vote, he would have won. So my job is to convince people, the people you're talking about are voting out of fear. Either they're Democrats who think that if Trump gets elected, it's going to be the end of the republic, or they're Republicans who think that if Kamala gets elected, it's going to be the end of the republic. So they're voting not because they particularly want that candidate, but because they're scared of the other candidate. And my, I think, challenge over the next 4.5 months is to persuade people to vote out of hope and out of inspiration rather than vote out of fear. My polls on average, if they're doing, the networks are aligned against me. So the ABC, NBC, CBS, the companies that do this polling are aligned against me, and I'm not complaining about that. I'm just stating a fact. They don't let me on to have interviews. They don't. In 18 months, I've only done 2 interviews on mainstream news and only 1 live interview and on any of the networks. So, and when they do the polls, they fix them. They ask, instead of asking the straightforward question of that is going to appear on the ballot, do you like Kennedy, Trump, or Biden? They ask, do you like Trump or Biden? They do a 2-man race, and then if people pick other, then they direct them to a separate field where they can choose between me, Jill Stein, and Cornel West. And so that dampens down my support to around 8 or 9%, and that's the polls people are seeing that show that I only have 8 or 9%. Those are those polls. Every time they ask about a three-way race with me, President Trump, or President Biden, I get between 15 and 20%, which is within shooting distance of winning. All I need to do is to get the 34% to win the election.
You've had remarkable success as an independent candidate. So you're clearly offering a message that people are thirsty for. First of all, I just want to better understand, why do you think that you've had such success as an independent candidate? And given that you were a Democrat, why are they anointing a different candidate instead of opening it up or maybe embracing you?
I think I'm having success because people are tired of the vitriol. They're tired of the anger, demonization on both sides. They're tired of this very, very toxic polarization that is tearing our country apart. And it's interesting because if you ask Republicans or Democrats, they'll both say it's terrible. The polarization is terrible. But they're all feeding into it. Very few of them, people saw me that I went to speak to President Trump this week. I met with him. He called me, and then I met with him, and and people got very angry. Democrats got angry at me for talking to him. And what I've said to people is, I'll talk to anybody. If Kamala calls me, I'm going to go talk to her. I spoke at the Libertarian Party convention. I think we need to start talking with each other. And if we don't do that, there's going to be a bad ending. The polarization right now is worse, I think, than at any time since the American Civil War. It's as bad as the 1960s. But now there's something worse, which is it's being amplified by these social media algorithms that reward you for looking at posts that fortify your existing worldview. Mm-hmm. So instead of challenging people's worldviews with new information that they may not want to see, or that may not support what they already believe, they're only feeding you information that supports your existing orthodoxies. And that is kind of digging this chasm between Democrats and Republicans, between Americans, deeper and deeper, so that we don't even recognize each other anymore. We say, those people aren't real Americans, they're communists, or, the other side, they're deplorables or whatever. And, we've forgotten that we're brothers and sisters, that, we're all part of a country, that we need to be proud of each other, we need to take care of each other, and we need to be able to learn to disagree with each other without hating each other. And what I've tried to do is to bridge that gap. And there's a lot of people who want to do that. 51% of Americans now call themselves, self-identify as independent. Mm-hmm. Nothing like that has ever happened. Independents were historically have always been an extreme minority party. And this time, this is the first presidential campaign in history where independents outnumber both political parties. Only 23% of Americans identify as Democrats, 25% as Republicans, and 51% as independents. And I win among independents. I win among young people. I beat both President Biden and President Trump among young people, independents, and the one group that I don't do well with is baby boomers, which is my generation. And if you think about it, I should be doing great with them, because that's the generation that remembers Camelot. They were here during the Kennedy era. I was for many years, when I was an environmental advocate, I was a great champion for that generation. And but now I'm regarded as a pariah. And the networks, the information that they get is coming from the networks. It's coming from ABC, NBC, CBS, CNN. And if you're living in that information ecosystem, you're going to have a very low opinion of me. You're going to have read a lot of mischaracterizations, a lot of defamations and pejoratives about me, and most of them that are not true, but you're not going to have a high opinion of me. If I was only looking at CNN, I'd have a really low opinion of myself. I wouldn't vote for myself.
Coin Stories is proudly brought to you by BitDeer, a global leader in disruptive technology for Bitcoin mining and AI. As a publicly traded leader, BitDeer boasts a massive 900 megawatts of operational data center capacity and an additional 1.1 gigawatts under development across 3 continents, positioning BitDeer as one of the most diversified and power-dense computing companies in the world. BitDeer's leadership laid the groundwork for the original advancements in Bitcoin mining ASICs. It's really the only company in the industry with the track record and clout to disrupt the market again with groundbreaking new designs for the next generation of mining ASICs. Now, BitDeer is leveraging years of expertise in data center and cloud management into high-performance computing through a recently announced partnership with NVIDIA. Join BitDeer in reshaping the world of Bitcoin mining. Learn more at bitdeer.com and explore how they are pioneering the future today. Well, I've seen a lot of the interviews that you've done and your talks, and one thing that stands out to me is really a message of unity and idealism, and going back to all the great values that made America strong. I loved your book, American Values. In fact, some of the things you just recently said just before, it made me think of something you wrote about how we don't make peace with friends, we make peace with our enemies, and that idea of bringing people together, even if you do have differing views. A lot of people are really craving that. They want to feel like the American dream is alive again. That's something I talk about on my show a lot. How do we revive the American dream and give hope for especially younger generations to be able to afford and dream big when it comes to the future?
Yeah, I mean, my whole campaign is about doing that. It's about making sure that your generation can buy a home, which right now, Gen X's and millennials are the first generation in the history that are going to be worse off than their parents. I have 7 kids. One of them's 40 years old, and he owns a home. The other 6, the younger ones, they all went to the best schools. They have great jobs, and none of them has any hope of getting into a home, even though they have great salaries, because the mortgage rates have doubled in 4 years. The price of a home has gone from $215,000 2 years ago to over $400,000 today, and the interest rates are now gone from 3 to over 7%. Nobody can afford that, and you have these giant behemoth investment houses like BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, Fidelity that are out there buying all the single-family homes. So those companies own 88% of the S&P 500. They own the economy. And they're now going after the real estate. They're going after agricultural lands, and they're going after residential lands, and they're going to turn America from a nation of owners, from an ownership society, into a nation of renters. And when that happens, we go from being citizens to being subjects, and it's not good for our country. When I grew up at a time when America was the richest country in the world. When my uncle was president, we owned half the wealth on the face of the earth. And one of the reasons that was true is because the American middle class was the greatest economic engine in the history of mankind. And part of the reason for that is that World War II had obliterated the industrial base of Europe, and our industrial base was cranking out cars and planes and blue jeans and transistor radios, and nobody else was doing it. But more importantly, we got every American into a home. So the GI Bill allowed anybody who had served in the military during World War II to buy a home very, very cheap. And then the new highway system made a lot of land available so that you could buy a land. When I was a kid, the average income was about $5,000, and the average price of a home was $6,000 or $7,000.
Yeah.
So everybody could afford it.
Right.
Right. And then if you own a home, it changes everything, because you care about your community, you care about your schools, your hospitals, your transportation, your police, you care about your neighbors, but more importantly, you have a source of equity. You can borrow money on that home. And if you have an entrepreneurial impulse, you can invest it in a bowling alley or a sporting goods store, or a saloon, or a bookstore, or whatever. And today, you have a whole generation of kids that has no access to equity, so they're going to be sidelined in the capitalist society. They're not going to be able to participate. There are many other things that we need to stop these big investment houses from buying homes and competing with our children for the cost of money. Bitcoin is going to play a critical role. It is almost a magical role in restoring our economy. And you know what? If I'm president, I'm going to immediately order the Federal Reserve and the Treasury to purchase several million Bitcoins and use that as the basis for the American dollar. And that's going to restore the dollar around the world, because now you have a currency that the U.S. is going to dominate. And it's a currency that can be traded at the speed of light. Anybody can do transactions on their cell phone without any kind of friction from banking fees or other transactional fees. And it's going to be a stable currency that is going to be a hedge against inflation, which means that everybody all around the world is going to start moving their assets into Bitcoin, which is going to strengthen the U.S. dollar, which is going to end this terrible deficiency we have in our balance of payments. Because if you live in China, and everybody in China would rather take all of their money and the real estate they own and put it in the United States.
Right.
People in Russia would rather do the same thing.
Right.
People in Argentina, but they can't do that because they have rules against that, and we have
capital controls, right?
Right. But if you can put it in Bitcoin, and you suddenly have an asset that that can be traded and transacted, all of the world's money is going to flow into that. And if America owns the 20% of the Bitcoins, America, that is going to go from $1 trillion value to a $400 trillion value, and that's going to generate 40 trillion a year in interest and values, and that pays off our entire U.S. debt. So it's like an obvious move that we should be doing, and that's what I'll do as president. It's one of the many things that I'll do. But that's the beginning of the resurrection of the American middle class.
I'm really intrigued by what you're saying, because it really does sound like you want to focus more on America, the country, rather than what we've seen the last few decades, which is America, the empire, and wasting all of this money when we're really hollowing out what made us so wonderful and what was an example to everyone else around the world, our economic strength. So let's talk a little bit more about Bitcoin, because if you're going to purchase a lot as a government, there are a lot of people who are so passionate because Bitcoin is the idea of separating money from the state. But all of a sudden you have politicians loving Bitcoin, state actors wanting to purchase Bitcoin. How do you resolve those questions for people?
I mean, there's some people who are going to be purists who aren't going to want any kind of government involvement, but Bitcoin will not lose from government purchases. It won't lose its quality of being the currency of freedom, the currency of hope, the currency of decentralization. Even when the government owns it, it can't centralize it. It can't centralize it. It's just by its nature decentralized. And I'm going to make sure there's no such thing as central bank digital currency. I think that's just a tool for totalitarian control, and I'll do everything I can to make sure the United States never ever has that. But everybody's going to benefit from Bitcoin being made transactional, from being made non-taxable. That you'll control your own nodes, you'll control your own wallet, you'll have self-sovereignty. It doesn't change it. It just means it's now much more practical, because you can go buy a beer with a fragment with a Satoshi rather than a dollar bill, and you won't have to pay taxes when it increases in value.
Right, that's your capital gains tax proposal.
Yeah,
You want to exempt
yeah.
it?
Well, yeah, I'm going to get rid of that. But what you just said is really, I think, the crux of kind of everything is that we need to wind down the war machine. Fiat currency was invented to fund wars, and base currency. If you have base currency, you're not going to have wars because people understand they have to pay for it. If you want to fund a war, you got to go to the taxpayer first and raise taxes, and they're going to ask questions about that war that are not getting asked these days. Or you have to have war bonds, and you have to have the public fund it. And again, there's a debate. So you can't go to war, against Iraq. In Iraq, a dictator, bad dictator, who never did anything bad to the United States, who had nothing to do with 9/11, and we tried to tie him to him, and it's turned out to be a catastrophe for our country. And my grandfather recognized this. My uncle John Kennedy said, the principal job of a president of the United States is to keep the country out of war. Mm-hmm. My grandfather, who had opposed World War I, said the same thing that you just said. He said the strength of a country is not from guns and bullets and planes and bombs. It comes from a strong, robust economy and a strong, robust middle class. And there's a famous historian called Paul Kennedy who teaches at Yale, and he's written a bunch of books about decline of empire, but one of those books, he looks at every empire over the past 500 years, and he shows that every empire, that the seed of its decline is in an overextension of its military abroad. Right now, we're spending $940 billion a year on the military, and on our military expenditures, and a total of about 1.3 trillion if you really, add up all the national security, the foreign aid, which is all weapons, etc. And that money during the Cold War, in 2024 dollars, we were spending at the height of the Cold War about 500 billion a year.
Right.
So half of what we're spending now. And that's all it takes. Why would we be spending more on the military now than we were during the height of the Cold War when we had to face an existential threat? Because we only need 500 billion to protect our country,
right,
to arm ourselves with teeth at home. Everything over 500 billion is about world domination. Mm-hmm. It's not about national defense.
And it's all printed out of thin air. You don't have to get it from tax receipts.
Thin air, so they never have to come and ask you for taxes. They do tax you. They tax you through inflation, which is a theft.
Exactly. The worst tax, right.
Yeah.
Yeah, John Quincy Adams, I believe, said that America should not go abroad in search of monsters to destroy. Exactly. We should really focus internally. So how are you going to stop the money printing machine? Is that something Bitcoin will help with? Because ultimately, I think that's the biggest problem Bitcoin fixes. We've gone so far into debt. We're killing people with inflation. Asset holders benefit. So how are we going to reverse that so that the average person, once again, has more opportunity?
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, I'd like to see us dismantle the Fed. And the Fed is a private bank. And, the regional banks are all run by directors who are chosen by the banking industry. And so, the whole purpose of the Fed is not to benefit the American public. The original purpose of it was important. It was to provide liquidity to sound financial institutions during economic crises. But it was quickly captured by the banking industry and by the sort of a national elite, and it now has policies which calls quantitative easing followed by high interest rates, which operates like a sump pump.
Yep.
To suck wealth out of the American middle class and elevate it northward into this new plutocracy or oligarchy of billionaires and corporate, corporate titans.
Yep.
And that's not democratic. And now we've got this system, of where we've destroyed the American middle class, particularly during COVID. We closed 3.3 million businesses. 41% of black-owned businesses will never reopen. We shifted $4.3 trillion from the American middle class northward. During COVID, globally, we created, in 500 days, 500 new billionaires. And this is both Biden and Trump. And and we destroyed, it was the like coup de grace for the American middle class. And now we have this configuration where we have this, this upper plateau of billionaires, and we have then this widespread poverty below and desperation where more than half of the people in this country can't even put their hands on $1,000 if there's a crisis. And if you're in that cohort, the engine light comes on in your car, it's the apocalypse for you. And that configuration is too unstable to support democracy for very long. And if we want to retain America as the exemplary nation, we have to start rebuilding the American middle class.
It's time for a quick break to hear these messages from my partners who make this podcast possible. Next up, Speed Bitcoin Lightning Wallet, one of the fastest growing wallets out there. Speed is a secure, low-cost way to send or receive Bitcoin instantly. Download Speed using the QR code on the screen or the link in my show notes and use promo code COINSTORIES10 to get 5,000 free sats. And finally, the why of Bitcoin is easy to grasp, but the how can be so confusing. The Bitcoin Way is a professional Bitcoin IT and security team offering personalized one-on-one support that guides you through cold storage, setting up nodes, inheritance planning, privacy best practices, and more. Set up your 30-minute free consultation today. All right, back to the show. Well, one thing I've learned through studying economics is that this is one of the disadvantages over the long run of being the global reserve currency. So can we talk about that a little bit? Because I think a lot of people would say we're moving into a more multipolar world. Some people are searching for a neutral reserve currency, which Bitcoin could certainly fill that role. What do you have to say about that? Because some people are so worried that we're going to lose the US dollar as global reserve currency, but because we have to artificially sort of strengthen it and constantly run trade deficit, we have this deficit with no tears. We are hollowing out the middle class also because we're the reserve currency.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say it's because we're the reserve currency, but if we weren't the reserve currency, it would enforce a discipline where we couldn't borrow money, and we can borrow money, unlimited money, because we're the reserve currency. There's advantages to being the global reserve currency, but
for certain
the way
people.
that we've enforced it, which is through the propagation of a war machine and money printing and the deindustrialization of America and the financialization of our own economy, have been catastrophic. I think if Bitcoin allows us to continue to be the global safe haven, which everybody wants America to be, the dollar to be the safe haven, for it to be the dominant trade currency, and even the world reserve currency without all of the and with because Bitcoin injects its own discipline. If we base a new class of Treasury bills on if we link that to Bitcoin and maybe a basket of other hard currencies, it injects the discipline that we need to just stop the orgy of money printing.
Right. Well, we are here at Bitcoin Nashville. I was curious, do you feel like Trump sort of stole your thunder a little bit? Because I have to give you credit. You were the first candidate for president that recognized the importance of embracing Bitcoin. And now here Trump is. Do you feel like you're still getting your message out?
Yeah, I mean, I'm happy about that. So, because I care about our country, and I think it's really important that there's two people running for president who understand this, understand the importance. I'm not, President Trump has done the same thing on chronic disease, which I've been talking about since day one, and recently he's begun talking about it too, and a lot of times using the same language and the same position papers that we put out. But I don't begrudge him that. I applaud that. I think it's really important that that we have as many people talking about it as possible. So I lose my monopoly on the some of the Bitcoin community, but I think most of the Bitcoin people understand that I was here and that I have a deep commitment to it, and that I understand the links between Bitcoin and freedom and personal freedom and self-sovereignty and property rights and American values. And but I don't think that he has that kind of sort of deep understanding. I don't think he's gone all the way down the orange rabbit hole. I think he has that he sees it as a financial instrument that may be useful at a financial level, but he doesn't understand what I think. The thing I love about Bitcoiners is, for most of them, it's not about making a big pile for yourself and whoever dies with the most stuff wins. It's all about this is the perfect currency. It is an elegant, poetic way to solve all of our worst national problems, the national debt. It's an off-road for inflation. Our balance of trade, the attack on liberties, the rise of totalitarian systems. All of these are ultimately, and government corruption. Government corruption. Yeah. It's the end of it. The worst government corruption is all over, because the transparencies of the system and the fact that it can't be manipulated, it is going to be forever decentralized. So it's just a beautiful creation, and it should be a feature of America. And I think almost every Bitcoiner understands that. And I would love to see President Trump articulate that version. I'm not optimistic that he will. I think it's going to be a more maybe pragmatic view and of just one tiny aspect of the advantages of Bitcoin, which are the financial parts.
Yeah, I mean, we do hope that the orange tidal wave will wash away all the corruption. It sounds like you have done your homework. I mean, I'm getting that sense. But certainly Bitcoiners are worried that politicians would just come out and say that they're for Bitcoin when they really don't understand it and could potentially change their tune. Any final thoughts? I mean, a lot of people watching this, just to wrap up, it just seems like a lot of hope has been lost, a lot of hope in the system, politicians in general. You see the lowest faith ever in media, in Congress. How will you reestablish a sense of hope and trust?
I mean, I'm going to make government trustworthy again. That's how you reinstate trust. I'm going to issue an executive order on day one. A lot of executive orders having to do with Bitcoin, including pardoning Ross Ulbricht. But also, I'm going to issue an executive order that any federal official that lies in the course of performing his duties is going to lose his job. I'm going to restore honesty again to government, and that's one way. And then, there's things that we need to do in this country that are just fundamental things. We need to restore the soils in this country, and that solves a lot of our problems, including the national debt. We need to bring in Bitcoin, and that also we're doing. We do all these things at once. You have one president who's going to do all of this stuff. We need to end the chronic disease epidemic, restore hope in our children, make housing affordable. And I can do all these things. I can do them without Congress. That's the only thing. The things that I promise to do are things that I can do without congressional. Because if you're promising something you're relying on Congress to accomplish, forget about it. But I've thought this through, and I've spent a lifetime litigating against the agency corruption, and I know how to fix it.
So you see a clear path to victory, but if not elected, would you serve in another administration?
I intend to be elected.
Okay. Thank you so much. This has been such an honor and a pleasure. We're so grateful as Bitcoiners that you're taking the time to really understand it. And it sounds like it really aligns with everything you talk about in the platform, fighting big corporations, big food, big agriculture, big pharma. And we have a lot of hope in your message. So thank you so much.
Natalie, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for checking out this episode of Coin Stories. If you're listening on the Fountain app, you can show your support and share your thoughts by sending a boost. Last month's top episode was a Bitcoin and macro hangout featuring Preston Pish, James Lavish, Susie Riley, and special guest Luke Groman. At Ryan Reynolds boosted 500 sats and said, "These hangouts are awesome. Please keep them going." I love reading and replying to your boosts, so download Fountain on iOS or Android today and make sure you subscribe to Coin Stories. This show is for entertainment and educational purposes only. Nothing should constitute as official investment advice, and you should always do your own research. My inbox is open. If you want to share feedback or guest suggestions, just reach out at natalie@talkingbitcoin.com. Make sure you're subscribed to the show and check out my free newsletter, nataliebrunel.substack.com. I'll see you next time.